Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar about the PFAS partnerships. My name is Emil. I'm the Secretariat Leader of the upcoming PFAS partnership. And today's webinar, we are going to discuss, or I'm going to discuss, how the partnership is going to work so that you can get a better picture of what it actually is and to evaluate if it's relevant for you and your business. The first half hour, I'll discuss the partnership structure and the philosophy behind it. And the last half hour is dedicated to questions and answers. So in the top of this webinar platform, you'll see a Q&A tab where you are more than welcome to write questions in there that I'll answer afterwards. So let's dive into the presentation. So the Danish EPA's PFAS partnerships for businesses is going to be a platform where you as a company can get together with other companies to handle the PFAS issues in collaboration. The partnership structure is divided in three. So we have a steering committee, that is the Danish EPA. And then we also have Danish Industry and Dansk Erhverv, which is branch organizations for the industry, and us, that is going to set the strategic directions on what we're going to do. Then we have some very close collaboration partners in the partnership. That is Dansk Standard, that is bringing a lot of knowledge about standardization and in general setting a proper frame for how we communicate and how we put the right words on things. We have Indvirke, which are communication specialists that will help with all that revolves around communication in the partnership. And then we have Aperion, which is a Belgian consultancy company, which are working within making impact assessments for companies. So three very strong partners that we bring into the partnership. Then we also have a knowledge network of companies where we will continuously spar with them to make sure that we bring the right knowledge to the partnership. The purpose of the partnership is to enable a platform for collaboration in industries where PFAS is not easily replaced, to accelerate phase out and minimization through a shared effort. I'll just repeat the last thing again. It is to accelerate phase out and minimization through a shared effort. We have identified three core values that is necessary for the companies to bring into the partnership if we're going to succeed in collaboration. First of all, we need to have a collaborative mindset. Second of all, we need to be transparent. And third of all, we need to be action oriented. So I know especially within the PFAS agenda, there's a lot of difficulties of sharing knowledge. Everybody's a little bit afraid of what if we are all of a sudden exposed to using PFAS and what it's going to mean for our business. Some of you might even think, well, replacing or minimizing PFAS will be a huge competitive advantage for us, so we cannot really be transparent, but we want to join the partnership anyways. And I just want to put some words to this, because if you have some products with PFAS in them that are really core and essential to your business, these issues are probably not the ones that you're going to bring into the partnership, but it's all of these other applications of PFAS. Gaskets, you're all using the same glues with PFAS. All of these communal products that you need in order to make your products work, but it's not a competitive advantage if you figure out to use something without PFAS. So these are the kind of general things that we are going to handle and to work on in the partnership. We have seen many times before how partnerships can really accelerate effort. And we here at DTI are very known to running these larger collaborative partnerships with the industry. And the most important thing is that we include the entire supply chain. And this is also going to be one of our focus points in the PFAS partnerships, that the members that are joining are representatives for the entire value chain and not for a single sector. So we are working a lot within plastics and plastics recycling. We are working a lot within textiles, critical raw materials, and infrastructure and scaling. And I truly believe that this PFAS partnership can show the same values of accelerating the efforts. All right, a little bit about the background of why are we all of a sudden starting these PFAS partnerships. Well, first of all, it's in the financial law. So we have this aftale om en national handlingsplan for PFAS. That's Danish, sorry for those of you who are only speaking English. But it's in the financial law that the government are going to give money to facilitate partnerships for the industry and businesses. So back in February, we gathered a lot of different industries and businesses, approximately 50 different businesses, to ask, what do you need in order to succeed in handling the PFAS issue? So we did this workshop in a lot of different groups, a lot of knowledge came out of it. But what is very interesting is that there was a very high degree of agreement between the companies of what is actually needed, and that every single company was working on the same things, but just for themselves. And that brings us to the structure of the partnership and what are the topics that we're going to handle. And this is again based on the workshop we did in February. So let's take the general structure first. We have a foundational phase, so a foundation that is needed for businesses in order to succeed in handling PFAS. Then we have some development, and lastly we have some implementation. And the implementation box is empty simply because businesses and industry are not ready to implement PFAS alternatives yet. And there's all of these areas needed in the foundation and development before companies can actually start implementing alternatives. So that is why this partnership, it's going to run for 2 years in 26 and 27, are going to focus on the foundation and development needed to put the companies in a place where they are ready to implement alternatives, whether it's regard to legislations, whether it's regard to company renommee, these kind of things. That doesn't matter, but we need to prepare the companies where we are ready to act. I'll just spend a little bit of time on this slide to discuss exactly what are the different tasks that we have identified that we need to focus on. First of all, it's education. Many of you are probably sitting maybe with the PFAS responsibility in your company. Many of you are probably alone in that because it's not really beginning to be that important to companies yet. Maybe if you are in a larger company, you're having a small team around it. But nevertheless, we need to make it, we need to ensure that we have some education within the company. So we need to prepare some educational material for the stakeholders in the companies so that they can actually see why they should allocate budget and why they should allocate time to work on the PFAS issue. And it's the same thing in the supply chain. We need to create some material that will educate the supply chain on what PFAS is. Many of you have probably experienced reaching out to a supplier, asking if they're using any PFAS, and then they're saying, no, we're not using any PFOS. And PFOS is one chemical out of the more than 15,000 PFASs, right? So education is very important, and we need to figure out how we do this properly. The second thing that we have identified through the workshop in February is that we need some network groups. So the partnership members that will join the partnership will have the possibility to join network groups within supply chain and procurement and R&D, where you are going to sit frequently with people from other companies and businesses and discuss hurdles, roadblocks, and potential solutions and great ideas that are coming from other companies. Again, to create a collaborative effort. Then we have identified some task forces where the task forces need to figure out what are we going to do within this. And again, most of these things that we are developing in the foundational and development phase is not something that is only relevant to PFAS. It's relevant within sustainability. It's relevant within REACH compliance. It's relevant within all of the future legislations that might arrive, because it's some of these supply chains, transparency, all of these factors that we are not currently that good at identifying today across all industries. So the first task force is going to be about communication. So how do we effectively communicate internally in the company, but also externally about PFAS? It's a little bit related to the educational part, but there's also a lot of the stakeholder management and how we communicate that we're going to work on. We also need to figure out how do we speak about PFAS? What are the common terms so that everybody is speaking the same language, so to say? Then we're going to look at legislation barriers. So what I've seen by working with PFAS for the past 3 years is that if we take flame retardants in plastics, for an example, they are often used PFAS as flame retardants, and there is some good alternatives, but not quite as good. And if we choose one of the alternatives, well, then there is some legislation in the US where you have to fulfill requirements that are basically only achievable if you're using a PFAS flame retardant. So we need to identify these legislations outside of the PFAS world that actually prevents us from implementing alternatives. Then we get to a task force about impact analysis. So everybody here at the webinar probably knows that if you want to get something through your organization and to make your decision makers make a decision about focusing on PFAS, they need to get an idea of what is it going to cost, what are the possibilities if we succeed. All of these numbers, basically, that we need to put on certain efforts within PFAS so that the decision makers can actually see the benefits and costs of doing that. Lastly, in the foundational phase, we need to look at categorization of PFAS use. I mean, I've heard this so many times. Emil, what is the alternative for PFAS? And that is really not a question that makes any sense, because we have 15 different kinds of 15,000 different kinds of PFASs that can do a lot of different things. And also, if you look at the periodic table as a chemist, you cannot find a chemical bond that is stronger than the carbon-fluorine bond. So we have some limitations where we cannot find a single alternative for PFAS. But maybe we can group the PFAS users so that within a certain group, we might be able to find one alternative that within this group will be a universal solution. I'll get a little bit more to that later. This is also the only technical leg that we have at DGI, that is the PFAS categorization and the substitution. Whereas for the rest, we are going to work as facilitators for the partnerships and the members to get the work done. If we get to the development phase quickly, we need to figure out how do we address regrettable substitutions? How are we actually making sure that if we are phasing out PFAS and replacing it with something else, that we are not just replacing it with something that's equally toxic and harmful, and that are going to be regulated in 5 years. Then we need to look at minimization of PFAS, both in the release and the use. So we know already now that there are going to be areas where we are not going to be able to phase out PFAS on the short term. So how do we create closed loop systems within the products and production that ensures that the PFAS are not getting out into the nature, but is actually contained? A good example of that is lead batteries in cars, right? We are moving away from lead, but lead in car batteries are still necessary. So we have created a closed loop for this specific use. And then we need to look at substitution. So after having categorized the different PFAS uses, we are going to look at what possible substitutions are there within these categories. Great. So more concretely, like how the platform or how the partnership is going to work. So first of all, we will have the members of the partnerships, and the entire partnership are going to meet physically 2 times a year, and then 2 times a year we'll have an online status meeting. So being just a member of the partnership is not going to be a lot of time spent. The time spent should be done in the task forces. So let's say that we have the education task force, where Indvirke, for an example, is a key stakeholder and a partner within that. Well, if that is actually something that you are already working on, or you think is really valuable, contributing into, then your companies can say, well, I actually want to be a part of the education task force. And then together you're going to figure out what is needed and what should the output be. Similarly, with the other task forces, impact assessments, closed loop systems, your company can participate in these task forces. And there is not a limit to how many task forces you can participate in, but you should, of course, also look into how much time do you have. And talking about time, it's also important for me to say that this work should be something that you're already doing in your own company. So I don't see the PFAS partnership as a platform where you have to put in a lot of extra work or a lot of extra hours that you would normally do. But instead of doing it yourself alone in the company, you can do it together with other people and other companies to accelerate your own efforts and to basically make it easier for you. In the task forces, you also need to discuss what are actually a proper outcome of this task force. I mean, the education that we need to provide, is that a written report? Is that an on-demand training course? Or what format should the output of the task force be? And similarly with the others, the impact assessment task force could end out in a white paper, or the closed loop systems for PFAS could end out in some kind of pre-standardization that Danish standard will bring further and make an actual standard on how to make the systems a closed loop. So this is an offer that counts on you. So the Danish EPA have set aside some budget to fund the partnerships, like how it's run, right? But so the Danish EPA are facilitating this platform for you as a business. What that means is that the membership is free, but you won't receive any additional funding for participating. Your engagements in the task forces are expected, but it's not required. We cannot force you to do any work within this partnership. The task forces will deliver the most value when many companies take parts in the task forces. So therefore, we also encourage you to take part in them. And the value very much also lies in the process. And the more you engage, the more you and your company will gain, right? So I usually say that I know exactly how to lose weight and get in better shape. I mean, that is not something that I'm not aware of how to do. I can read plenty about it on the internet. But if I'm actually going to succeed with it, I know that I have a lot better chance by going together in a group, all with the same purpose and working on that. Right? It's the same with this partnership. Of course, there will be some value in the outputs from the task forces, but the real value lies within the learnings and the experiences you develop through the work in the task forces. I also want to mention, I think the person who have made the most impact in my life the past year is the person that made me realize that I'm responsible for my own development. And it might seem extremely trivial. Of course, I'm responsible for my own development, but I don't think I actually realized it until he put some words on it. And I want to say the same thing to you, that if you are going to participate in this PFAS partnership, then you are responsible for your own development and own outcome of it. It's up to you to take as much knowledge as you can, but of course also to give away some knowledge. But don't expect to participate in the partnership and be able to sit back, because the more you engage, the more you'll get out of it. So the first steps of the partnership, well, right now we're in the membership registration and preparations. So we are preparing to kick off the PFAS partnerships. There will be a formal meeting in January where we'll kick off the official partnership with all of the participants getting together. The date for that will come out very shortly. In February next year, the network groups will start, and then we'll initiate the first task forces. And that is going to be a part of the kickoff meeting, that the companies that are participating should identify which task forces is important to start with now. And then in March, we'll have the initial categorization of PFAS uses done. This is some work that we are doing currently and that we expect to have prepared for March. And getting to that, what do I mean with all of this PFAS categorization? Well, if we take fluoropolymers for an example, I know that fluoropolymers are probably the PFAS that are most present to many of the companies watching this webinar today. Of course, there's also non-polymer PFASs that are relevant, but now we are talking about fluoropolymers. They have a lot of properties, and we are not going to be able to make a material ever in the world's history that are going to be able to do the same things as fluoropolymers does. But if we take all of the properties and say, well, a lot of applications are actually only using these properties of the fluoropolymers, well, then we can categorize that and say, well, maybe we can find a single substitute here that will be a universal substitute for this group of PFAS uses, and so forth, until we have covered the entire use of PFAS uses and found substitutions for each one of them. So how are we doing this right now? Well, right now I have some data scientists look into a lot of AI and data scraping. So we are taking the 5,600 comments to the EU restriction proposal that came out some years ago now. The SEAC's opinion, the updated restriction dossier, a lot of patents, and in general, all available online data we can find. So right now we're just scraping and figuring out what are every single PFAS use known to mankind. And just to give you an example of what we expect of data outputs, right now we have identified approximately 1,200 PFAS or specific PFAS uses, and we have barely just started. But if we're looking for an example, it could be that we're using PTFE and we're using it for a membrane for a medical device. And the reason why we're using it is because it's chemically inert, it has biocompatibility, and it has thermal stability. Another use could be exactly the same PTFE that is used in a membrane for a medical device, but there it actually has some different functional properties, right? So maybe you can see from this, we're not going to be able to find a substitution for membranes in medical devices, because if we're looking at all the membranes, they would cover the entire functionality space of PFAS properties or fluoropolymer properties. But maybe we could take the membranes that are used for medical devices that has these functional properties and pool them together with other similar uses. So again, maybe you can also hear it a little bit on me. We're still a little bit unsure where this is going to end, but we have started the data collection and we are starting to explore where are PFAS actually used. The next slides, I'm not going to go into depth with. It's more to let you know that when we send out the PowerPoint presentation, you can read a little bit more about each of the task forces and what our thoughts behind the task forces is going to be. And with that, I would like to say thank you for listening, and let's keep in touch. You can find me on LinkedIn. Thank you for your attention, and the registration for the PFAS partnerships is already open. So feel free to scan the QR code and subscribe or join the membership. Again, I just want to emphasize that you should not be concerned about signing up for the membership. Again, the membership is free, and per se, we cannot force you to do any work within it. So I would encourage you to sign up to make sure that you have all of the information, and then maybe even join the partnership in the beginning to really figure out if it brings any value to your company. Thank you very much, and then we'll go to the question and answers. We have one here. You mentioned it in the beginning, but I didn't quite catch it. Were you only interested in the more general cases, but not any specific use cases? Well, as I also mentioned later in my presentation, a lot of the purpose of the partnership is to create the foundation and development enabling companies to start implementing alternatives. But with that said, I mean, the partnership is going to have a lot of different companies participating, and I mean, we are not restricting you within anything. And if you can find other companies that would be interested in looking into specific use cases and alternatives for these, basically getting ahead of the curve, well, then you are very welcome to do so. Yeah. And yeah, another one. In which countries is this partnership getting active? Just Denmark or any other countries? Well, for now, it's only a Danish initiative, which means that it's mainly for Danish businesses, but we are actively figuring out how are we going to include non-Danish companies. So again, I would encourage you to sign up for the membership, and then we'll make sure to figure out how non-Danish companies can participate. But we still need to figure out the specifics for that yet. And there's just another question very similar to the one that I just answered. But again, I would encourage you, even if you're a global company, to sign up, and then I'll make sure to contact you within the next month when we get more knowledge about how international players will be incorporated into the partnership. Currently, there are no more questions. I'll just give it 1 or 2 minutes in case anybody have more questions. And otherwise, if not, I would really encourage you to reach out to me. Also, if you want to start immediately or you want to work on specific use cases ahead of the curve, definitely contact me, and we can talk about a potential collaboration. There's a question about which standard to test, if you should test if there is PFAS in a textile accessory. I would encourage you to reach out to me personally, as I think this is a little bit out of the scope for the PFAS partnership. Thank you very much for participating, everybody, and I'm looking forward to see your name and company on the participation list, and looking forward to see hopefully a lot of you in January where we'll kick off. And if any questions pop up afterwards, again, feel free to contact me directly. Thank you very much. Bye.